Okay, so hopefully you've taken time to watch that first video on statistics. I really like that video because it kind of shows you some real-world examples of how statistics is used. A lot of people, when they think of statistics, usually what comes to mind is maybe sports, because of baseball cards have the baseball stats on the back, or possibly casino, because at the casino there's different odds, probability and odds play a role, and so usually a lot of times people are just limited to just a few things like that in their mind, and what they don't realize is that statistics is actually a tool that helps us organize and draw information out of data so that we can make well-informed decisions. And that is really the kind of the main idea behind statistics, that it is a useful tool. So let me give you a definition here. So a good way to define statistics, how I usually do it. Statistics is kind of the science or the math of collecting, organizing, analyzing, and drawing conclusions from data. Okay, so to me the big idea behind statistics is in life we make a lot of decisions, or in business, in government, in medicine, in education, all these things. We have a lot of decisions to make, and we can make a decision based off of kind of what's on the top of our head, what we think might be a good idea. Or if we know how, we can actually collect data that can inform our decision-making process and help us make the best decision possible. And statistics is that tool then that you use to know exactly what data to collect, how to collect it, how to organize it, and how to analyze it to determine what it says, and then ultimately what sort of decisions you should make based on the data. Okay, and statistics is becoming more important in the world today. More people are seeing value in statistics and are wanting to use statistics. And I think the reason for that is because we now have software on computers that can do the statistics. It can do the number crunching, and it can do it very, very quickly. In fact, even on a smartphone, someone could email you a data set with thousands of values. You could just click on the phone, bring up the data set, and then you can tell Microsoft Excel. So if you don't know this, Microsoft Excel is a database that can actually perform really amazing calculations in just seconds. And so you can tell it to calculate the mean, standard deviation, other values, and it'll do it in just seconds. And so since we have this tool, a lot of people want to know, how do we use this tool? So in the past, calculators were invented like in the 70s. That's when people started being able to afford a calculator. It was, smaller. You could use it very, very practically. Before that, it took whole rooms of computers to do calculations. So they sent man to the moon, right, without even having calculators. So a really interesting thing is if you go and watch Apollo 13, when the accident occurs on the space shuttle, all the engineers have to figure out how to bring the astronauts home. And what you end up seeing is all the engineers bring out a slide rule. And a slide rule is a way that you can perform calculations using logarithmic scales. And that's how they did it. They didn't even have calculators to do their calculations. And so a lot of this is relatively new. And so now that we got this software, people want to know how to use it. And so different areas that use statistics, let me just throw out a few examples. Business. Businesses have a lot of decisions to make, and money's involved. They want to make the best decisions possible. An interesting thing, I had a student who worked at Olive Garden, and they talked about how the manager has software that they plug in all the data, like how many people came, what they ordered, and then they analyze the trends, and they use that to determine, how many people to put on the schedule each night, and what sort of prep cooking to do, and things like that. So even a restaurant might be able to use statistics to make good decisions. So government. The government has a lot of decisions to make. It affects each one of us. And even if the politicians themselves don't do statistics, they hire people, consultants or whatever, who collect the data and prepare reports, and then they would use the information and the suggestions that the statisticians collect in order to make the best decisions possible. So medicine or medical research, these are decisions that affect our health. They could be life and death decisions. They want to make the best decisions possible. And so when doctors are doing studies, knowing if certain treatments are effective, things like the Food and Drug Administration, knowing if drugs have side effects, things like that. All of this involves statistics. And so along with that is like quality control and industry. They kind of go together. So like are the parts that come off a line, are they do they meet specifications? Are they defective in any way? At John Deere they do a lot of quality control. But think about that's for tractors, and it's important for safety and other government regulations. But think about the airline industry and people building airplanes, and how important it is that there's the quality is being met. And so people use statistics to decide these things. Education is another one. So not only do we use statistics to decide, like, the placement, like what classes people should take, or whether people pass a class, whether they learned what they needed to learn from the class, but also whether certain teaching methods are effective or not. There's oftentimes studies that are done. So just in education in general and educational research. And just scholarly research in general. All these studies that people do in psychology, sociology, these sorts of things. And then I'll do one last one, insurance. So for an insurance company, the people that collect data and help the insurance companies decide what rate they should charge for the insurance, they're called actuarials, and they actually make a lot of money. They have an important job, and it's important that the insurance company just can't guess what to charge for insurance. They got to make sure they're charging what they need to charge in order to make a profit and to conduct their business. Here's a good example. My wife is from the San Francisco Bay Area, and her car insurance in San Francisco was I think it was like $2,500. And before we got married, I never drove a car. I didn't know what car insurance cost. My wife didn't know that it was different in different areas, and so in our budget we put down like $2,500. This was before we got married, and it was a long distance relationship, but we figured that this is how much it would cost us. But when she moved here, our car insurance ended up being something like $670 or something like that. It was a whole lot less. Well, why is that? Well, in San Francisco, it's a very crowded city. You have a higher risk of getting into an accident. You're more likely to get into an accident. Also, the standard of living in San Francisco is very, very high, and so it costs a lot of money to live there. And all these things affect what they need to charge for the insurance. And the actuarials are the people who put all that together and determine what the insurance rates needs to be. So you can see there's lots of areas. In fact, pretty much any area where you have a decision to make, you could be using statistics. And as long as you know how to use it. One thing I would say, though, I think it's important that we don't treat statistics as if it's some kind of like some god that we have to bow down to and do everything that it says. There's a lot to be said about human common sense, and I think sometimes people could have a good idea just because they're human. They could know what would be a good idea, and then you could gather the data, and the numbers might suggest something different. And sometimes I think it's probably unwise to go with what the numbers say when it's clear to you that that's not the best decision possible. I think humans should have an override or a veto power in a sense, and it's important for us to use our common sense. So statistics is only a tool, but we need to use it wisely. And then the other thing is it's important that it can be misused. Okay? So politicians, advertising agencies, other people that have an agenda that they want to get across, they can use statistics to kind of and they can use it in misleading ways to kind of make it seem like their point of view is correct. I think it's important, though, to not become cynical. A lot of people are cynical and they don't think statistics has any value. And you can't trust anything. But the point is, statistics is a tool that if you know how to use, it can be a useful tool. So if you know how to use it, it's a useful tool. But if people misuse it, then it can be a misleading tool. So what is the best way to not be misled by statistics? Well, I think the best way is to learn how to use it, because once you know how it's used, then you can know how it's misused. And a good example of this are people who analyze money to see if it's counterfeit or not. What I've heard is they don't study necessarily all the different types of ways that a bill could be counterfeit. What they do is they study the real thing. And all the things about a real dollar bill or a real $100 bill or whatever, and because they know what the real thing is, then when it gets misused, then they can recognize, or I should say, when they have counterfeit money, they can recognize when it is misused. And so statistics is when they have counterfeit, they can recognize that it's counterfeit. Okay, so statistics is basically a tool. When it's used correctly, it can be very useful. It can also be misused as well. So that gives you a good idea what statistics is. Now, one of the first things in statistics then, once you've learned how to collect the data and you know what data to collect and you collect it, one of the first things you have to be able to do is to organize the data. And so that's what this section is going to be about. One way that we organize data sets is by constructing frequency distributions, and that's what we're going to be looking at in the videos coming up.